Hi, everyone. Next up, Sovereign Tech Agency, Adriana. Happy to be here. Talking about, I need to click myself, but that is the engine room for digital sovereignty, how we like to call ourselves, and that needs some explanation. I would like to come back to what Daniel said in the beginning. And if I listened tentatively correctly and understood him right, we want to talk about solutions. And that's what we want to do. We want to provide one puzzle piece in this very complex picture that we have in this challenge of securing, strengthening, supporting the open source ecosystem. And we believe that with the Sovereign Tech Agency, as I said, we built one puzzle piece, which we think is somehow the engine room that can help us achieving this mission. And I also want to come back to something else that Daniel mentioned, which is the not so nice story of crises and war and problems. But sometimes things like this help us to understand that we have a problem, and maybe that problem has been visible for too long. I don't think it is invisible for many of us in this room, but I know that it's invisible or has been for a long time for many policymakers. But in 2020, 2021, a couple of things happened roughly at the same time. So that's a little bit of our backstory, and sometimes I tell it as a joke, although it's not funny. But when people ask me how I convinced the German government to, this year now, 20 million, put that money in maintenance of existing open source infrastructure, I say, it didn't take that much. It took a war in Europe, a pandemic, a massive security flaw, and all of that to happen roughly at the same time. And that's what lets people look at the invisible problem. So what we said in 2020, 2021, we pointed at one common denominator of all of these problems, which often is infrastructure. If you need to innovate to help yourself out of a crisis, you need to have infrastructure in place. If you need to react in case of a war, infrastructure is the first line of attack, it's the first thing that breaks, it's the first thing that decides if you're even in a position to defend yourself. And unfortunately, infrastructure is often overlooked until it breaks. So we know if a road or a bridge is looking kind of in a bad shape. We don't see that for software. Some of us do, because they look at software every day. Quite a few people don't. But we told that story of, hey, infrastructure is actually the invisible problem that we need to fix if we want to innovate, be competitive, and be sovereign. Then we need to, in the 21st century, think about software just as much as roads and bridges. And we took that report as our Bible, if you want to call it like that, which is by now pretty old. It's from 2017. But it really helps non-technical people, and my background also is from public policy, that's why I speak their language, to understand, okay, wait, but if that's the same for software, then maybe there is actually a job for us to do, and that's what we lobbied for. At the same time, when all of these rather not-so-nice accidents and incidents happened, Germany had the presidency at the European Council, and they had their keyword being digital sovereignty. So we talked to them, what does sovereignty actually mean for you? And the definition that we got from the German government back then actually was pretty much in line with how we thought about it. It's about the self-determined use of technology and how you shape it and use it as an individual, but also as a government or a company or any kind of organization, civil society organization, could be anyone. So it is really about how we engage and interact with digital technologies. And we said if that is how we understand digital sovereignty, then it's not just about one project or another or a software tool or a service. It's really about the whole ecosystem. Because in the end, we can replace one product with another, but that just might mean we replace one dependency with another, and that is not what we want. What we want is to have a network or an ecosystem of many actors being interdependent and co-creating software and collaborating, and that is how we become sovereign. Not with the idea that you need to do everything yourself, you need to isolate, it's somehow stopping at national borders, because none of this is feasible and none of this is what we want. So understanding the open source ecosystem and engaging with it and being an active player in it is what makes us actually sovereign. But for that, you also need to understand a little bit how software development works. Because again, just as one problem is invisible, that is not clear to many people. They believe innovation just, means writing just new code from scratch. They kind of take everything that's already out there for granted. They don't know that software maintenance is something that needs to happen continuously. It doesn't rain from the heavens that we have programming languages and libraries and all of this available and open for people to innovate and compete and use technology and create new technology. So we talk a lot about, and we said this XKCD comic did like the heavy lift of our communications work in Germany and elsewhere. It's another running joke in our team that we just printed out this and went to government and be like, problem? And they were like, yeah, that does not look good. And is it a joke? No, it's not a joke. But no, actually not. And with all these numbers we had to back it up, we really understood, they really understood that all the big goals, let's call it, the newest AI strategies, the newest tools for government, the whole conversation about digital public infrastructure, the stacks we see, they all rely on a whole ecosystem to run in the background. And if we neglect that and just focus on the top, we're building our castles in sand. And we're not having a holistic, sustainable, and not secure strategy of being sovereign and self-determined in how we use and shape technology. So that was all the story and the advocacy we did back in 2020, 2021. That led to the creation of the Sovereign Tech Agency, which I believe is one puzzle piece in the set of solutions we need to make sure that the open source ecosystem continues to exist, to remain open, secure, accessible, and be that driver for the SDGs and for innovation and competition and for sovereign use and development of technology. So let me introduce you a little bit to what we are doing and also what we are, because it's, I think, a bit unique. I'm not 100% aware of the different options in other European member states, but Germany has the option to create companies, limited liability companies, that are owned by the government. So that's a special form of organization. They did that quite a lot recently, have done it back in the days. They have done it for their Autobahn, motorway company. So sometimes I say we're like the highway company for Germany, but in the 21st century for software. We invest in the roads and bridges of the internet. And they did that with us as well. We were incubated in an innovation agency of the German government, which itself sometimes says we're like DARPA, minus the military and minus a couple of zeros in their budget. But that's where we originated from, and now we're an independent company owned by the German government, and doing a job commissioned by the German government to do it because they believe we can do it better than they can do it themselves. So we're not funded, we're commissioned, which I think is an important distinction here, because it is a government job that we're doing, and that's the belief that we're advocating for. And we started doing the Sovereign Tech Fund, which is the name that most people, I think, by now know, because it's 3 years old. And it's also not a fund in the sense that most people understand it, so we don't give out grants, we procure. Again, the same logic. We think this is a government job because society, economy, research, civil society all rely on infrastructure to work, and digital infrastructure is open source software running smooth in the background. Let's just generalize all cases. So we buy the things that we need. We buy them, we don't own them because they're open source. But we're not giving them money and say, you do nice work here, you have nice money. No, we do contracts, milestone-based contracts, and we say, this and this and this is really important for this sector, this use case, those groups. And in order for that to continue to run smoothly, what do we need to do? We go into a conversation with the people who do that software. That can be an individual person. It can be a community. It can also be a company or a foundation. It really depends. And the contract also can mean that people reduce code. It's not always building new code. Sometimes it means reducing code to make the software more secure, more stable. That is what the Sovereign Tech Fund is doing. We also got another job from the government to build up a bug bounty program. And we said, OK, we can do that, but we're going to make it a bug bounty plus, because better than cure is prevention. So we're going to support communities, organizations, small teams in skills training, practicing how to even prevent new bugs from existing. Of course, you will always have bugs, but it's better to support people in keeping the number low than just paying security researchers and pointing them out, the new bugs. And also, we then have to pay for fixing them, because it's not enough to know that there's a problem. You also need to do something about it. And the third program that is just coming out of its pilot phase, this is how we always work. We start with a pilot, we look how it works, we evaluate, and then we scale or we abandon it. So far, everything seemed to work nicely, so we're probably also going to continue and grow the fellowship program. And with all due respect, I sometimes, when I talk to policymakers, tell them, if you know that there are recurring tasks, you're not always handing out a single contract to a single company. If you know the light bulb needs to be changed regularly, the floors need to be swept every second day, sometimes the door handle break, you don't do individual contracts like what we do with the fund. You employ a janitor. And software needs continuing maintenance. There's always something that needs to be swept or fixed or changed. So maybe we need to elaborate a little bit on that and explore options for governments to have something like a maintainer in residence, like 50 people not doing anything else but looking at the software that our societies rely on, think about the comic, and pay them as public servants. Because if you have a public job, you have public servants for that. And we don't believe that this is what every maintainer should be in the future, but we believe next to companies who let developers on companies paid time work on maintenance, and next to civil society communities, open source communities who do that as volunteers, the government has to play a role in there and find its niche where it can provide structures to make open source more secure. So this is what we do. We lobby or advocate or tell that story of, hey, maybe in the 21st century, infrastructure is an invisible software layer that is a global common good, as in the open source ecosystem, and we need to maintain and invest into this. And maybe governments should pick that up as a job, and they then, and that's what we try to do at the agency, need to come up with new instruments for that, like the fund, like the fellowship program, like the resilience program. Maybe we need in the future attract new talent and diversify the pool of people who do that work. So we say it's like training a new muscle for governments, because they haven't done this before, but they should see it as a job that they have to do forever. And this is a beautiful German word, and we don't quite know, although we are a team of different languages, how to perfectly translate it. We say sometimes it's a public service, but what that word in German means, it's basically word-by-word translation. It's a service for existence. So we believe some services, some structures just need to be ensured by a certain quality and always accessible under, like, for whatever it costs, basically, in order for us as societies to function. So we often regroup under this health, education, but also infrastructure in Germany. And that's what we push for open source to be recognized as. And I skipped over one thing in the beginning, but I think this room has some level of understanding of software that other rooms don't have. But what I mean, because I distinguish between products and services, and I put that always very simple, I mentioned languages and libraries, maybe drop some names of the things that we invested in. It's like curl or Fortran or PyPy. It's really, simply put, the software that developers need to develop software. And I think that's really important to have that understanding, that it's not just about a payment system or government software or identity wallets or whatnot. It's also the software that we need to develop that software and to maintain it and to make sure it's secure. And that is what we're focusing right now at. Also because if you invest in those components, it really scales through the whole ecosystem. And the budget we have is still relatively small. In the first 9 months of the fund running, we could have invested 100 million, and we only had 17. So there's room to grow. And just peppering you with some arguments why we believe this is actually a public service, because we can directly relate the open source ecosystem and digital infrastructure to empowering science and innovation. That's also why, what I mentioned in the beginning, we were incubated by the National Agency for Disruptive Innovation in Germany, because they understood immediately, if you have an idea, you want to build a prototype, and you want to build a product, and you want to bring that product to a market, the speed you have is decisive. And if you have an open source ecosystem that is well maintained and well taken care of, you're faster. It's also a return of invest. So this is not charity. And I don't think that when we talk to companies, when we talk to the government, we don't label this as nice money or like, you know, you can do it if you have some spare. No, if you don't do it, you might not feel it immediately because of all the volunteers doing it with intrinsic motivation, but that's not how it should work. If you don't invest, it's going to crumble. And who can afford to invest are the biggest companies who have enough money to just do it, but they're going to do it in their own private interest, which on the long run is going to also harm them because they will have less competitors and less innovators in their ecosystem that enriches their business model. So it's really a market failure we need to think about in that really low-level infrastructure that we need to fix. And if you do that investment, we looked at some numbers, it's going to directly strengthen your competition and innovation. And that is the reason why, from the German government, our commission, our money, the commission we have, comes from the Ministry of Economic and Economic Affairs. And it's a measure to look at industrial policy. And I think that is really interesting and a point we should emphasize, because way too often it is believed that all of this is, you know, maybe some volunteers, maybe some lovers of open source, and the relationship between how this is really, really critical is often not seen. So we always say it's two sides of the same coin. There's a lot of talk about innovation. There's a lot of talk about competition, especially in the EU right now. But if you don't think about maintenance, and if you don't understand how modern software development works, if you don't want to understand that open source has won and does need to be treated as the best method for all the kinds of goals we want to achieve, then you will lose out and you will probably not be effective with your strategies. So to finish, this is not a job that should be done by one actor as the Sovereign Tech Agency alone. This is not a job that the German government can do alone. This is something that, if we believe it's a new public muscle, we should have in every government. Like every government has their ministry or their department for infrastructure. Every government should have their department for digital infrastructure that finds ways how to support the open source ecosystem because they rely on it. And best case, we don't do that in isolation because that is not how it works. If you want to strengthen a shared common good, you need to talk and collaborate and coordinate. So speaking at the UN or at the EU level here is actually really crucial, because this will only support and benefit us all if we do it together. So let's hope in the future we'll see more and better sovereign tech agencies. And I'm happy to answer a couple of questions. I think they will come later. And maybe next year, when we do this again, there might be another endeavor that is very similar to ours. I'd be happy about it. Thank you.